Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader Podcast. This is your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. If you're watching on YouTube, glad to see you. Glad you're here. If you're listening, wherever you listen to podcasts, man, I'm thankful you're listening in today. Maybe someone shared this episode with you. Maybe you're a subscriber. If you're a subscriber, great. If not, I'd love for you to subscribe. And as well, after you get done with this episode, give me a rating, a review. I'd like to know what you thought about this episode, what you learned. I love getting those emails, those messages of what people learn, what they gather from this conversation. Today, I'm excited to sit down with Charlie Wetzel. All right, that name probably does not mean anything to you unless you really know about leadership. Okay, now that's not a punch. That's not a slight. That is, this man is responsible for selling over 32 million books. Well, how's he responsible? Because he helped write them. See, Charlie is the ghostwriter, the partner, the Batman to the Robin, the Robin to the Batman that is known as John Maxwell. So Charlie has written ever since developing the people around you, now over 28 years with John Maxwell. So much as we learn in this conversation that he really has taken John's words that he normally speaks and this outline that he creates during the writing process and has brought them to life in his books. He does a tremendous job of really blending those. You'll hear about that in this episode. You hear about the whole process of writing and how John goes about it. He'll even share a little tidbit of what he gets from John to write a book, which is cool. As well, I will talk to you about kicking off this month of May, the book that we will go through, the 21, that's upside down, showing to the camera, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. If you've ever read any leadership books, hopefully it's one of them. If you've not read it, or maybe it's been a while since you've read it, pick up the 25th anniversary version that's coming out here in this month of May 2022. I hope you guys are able to grab it. It was funny, and I actually share this in the latter part of the interview where my copy comes from. It was really something cool that I didn't even realize until today, because I never looked inside the front of the copy. It's always seen the back part. So I'm excited for you to plug into this episode, listen, watch my conversation with Charlie Wetzel as we unlock everything, 21 Laws of Irrefutable Leadership. Charlie, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. It's a pleasure to see you. As I mentioned, I've been involved in a room that you've been in as part of a project with the John Maxwell Company, and excited to just have a conversation with you and really kind of share more about Charlie to the leadership world that you've impacted so much that people probably don't even realize that you had such your fingers in the pot.
Well, cool. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and to get to chat with you.
Yeah. So this month, as part of the Impact Driven Leader podcast, we are focusing on spotlighting the book 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, which you helped produce to develop with John. But before we get into that book and talking about the 21 laws, we'll go through enough of that. But I want to know, kind of for everyone listening in, what is your relationship, Charlie Wetzel, what is your relationship to the millions and millions of books that the John Maxwell Company and John Maxwell himself has released?
Well, I think the latest number that I've heard from John is 34 million books. Okay. And I've been involved with probably about 32 or 33 million of those.
So what you're saying is John isn't very good at selling books without Charlie. But you didn't say that, but that's what I heard.
John is great at selling books without me. He just is not as prolific at writing them without me.
Well, I mean, you got to write it to be able to sell it, right? And so, yes, that's good. I mean, people need to be appreciated, and sometimes it is, and I know there's no lack of appreciation from the whole entire Maxwell team and myself included. It's not to be that, but it's also, man, you've made a big difference.
Yeah. Everybody's very gracious about it. I feel like I've been lucky to be on the ride with John, and I have been since 1994. So, early on when I came to work for him, he hired me as his researcher, and I didn't know what that was going to mean. And the first thing he did was hand me a manuscript, and he said, look, the person who worked for me before you worked on this manuscript. The publisher didn't like it. See what you can do with it. By the way, I'll be on the road for the next 6 weeks. I'll talk to you when I get back. And off he went on some kind of a summer tour of speaking. And I worked on this book, and, I worked on it for a couple of weeks. And the first chapter was pretty good. It didn't need much. The second chapter was a lot rougher, and, I'm working on that. I'm rewriting. And then I discover a bunch of outlines in a file drawer. And it's John's handwritten outlines, because he'd outlined the whole book very meticulously. So I threw out that manuscript that the other person had worked on, and I worked from his outlines and just plugged away at that, brought it to him. He said, let's take a look and see what the editor thinks. Gave it to the publisher. He said, yeah, it's good. And he said, okay, we're good. That turned out to be Developing the Leaders Around You. It was the first thing I worked on for John when he hired me. And we haven't looked back. It's been, over 100 books now.
So I think that's that outline, and there's a couple different trains of thought here that I want to be able to hook onto. But the first is John's pretty meticulous still about writing all of his books with his 4-color pen and his legal pad, right? So I'm guessing that is the outline that you saw.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, so I know I'm jumping ahead to the 21 Laws, but in his notes that he gave me for the 25th anniversary edition of the 21 Laws, here's John's handiwork. You can see.
Okay. Yeah.
4-color pen, fill in the blank, stuff taped in, a little bit of highlighter. That's John, and he does that for a speech. He does that for a book. He's very, very disciplined, very meticulous.
So what I think is interesting there, and I've heard you mention this before in some of your previous podcasts, but it's also, I guess, me for the couple of years being around John and just being a sponge and absorbing and, see him present and speak and be so well and, do so well in front of a crowd. And yet I've been on stage with him and see the iPad, and it's just, it's notes. It's kind of an outline. And so what I gather is really his speaking and writing start with the same format of that outline and kind of those bullet point ideas. And as I've seen him speak and present, he just fills in the blanks with the appropriate stories. And he does such a masterful job of reading the crowd and reading the audience and knowing, hey, I'm here to speak today, but I also spent a half hour beforehand getting to know everyone so I can pull from those stories that are maybe relevant in the points I want to make. So what I'm gathering is he kind of does that for a book and then maybe hands it to you, and then you do all the essentially speaking into the book. Is that kind of a way to look at it?
I think that's a pretty good analysis. John's very organized. He thinks in outlines. He thinks in bullet points. He is great with a turn of phrase. He's good at the words that he uses for that. He's very precise, but it all comes across as effortless and off the cuff. Part of that's due to his experience. Part of that's due to his preparation. When he's working on a book, he's doing the same kind of meticulous outlining. There have been some of the books he'll actually do drafts of chapters, but for the majority of them, he's done an outline. And he's very meticulous. So he's got his bullets in there. He's got his quotes in there. He's got anecdotes in there or jokes, those little things. They're all arranged the way he wants them. And then I take those and I think, okay, how do I craft this in a way that an audience who's sitting down with this book a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, or in this case, 25 years from now, how are they going to accept that and experience that? So that's kind of the focus that I have. John does read the room. He reads the crowd. One of the things I think he's really genius at is I always believe he knows what everybody in the room is feeling in that moment. Yeah. He reads it. He changes because of it. He'll stay someplace and speak about something that he knows is connecting or he senses that is really needed by the people in the room, or that the person who invited him wants him to touch on, or maybe that even the Holy Spirit is speaking to him on, and he'll stay there. So he crafts it for that moment. You can't do any of that in writing. You've got to anticipate what somebody is going to do far in the future, how they're going to experience it, and you're not going to get any feedback. So I think that's probably one of my skill sets, is having that sense of anticipation about how something is going to land with a reader at some point in the future. So I like to tell people that, like a prize fighter, John has punch. He's got a knockout punch. What I do is I provide the footwork. Okay. Because on stage, he will transition with a look, with a laugh, with tone of voice, with a movement on the stage, by kneeling, by sitting, by standing up. He does all these things in transition, and he does it intuitively, but none of that comes across in an outline. An outline is just dead and dry. So it's my job to kind of put the footwork so that John's punch really is smooth. Otherwise, the rides can be a little bit bumpy.
Well, my guess would be I've been enough audience members of John's and then read enough books to know that does come across. It took you probably a while to circumvent that, navigate that, and really be able to distill it down to bring it out.
It did. On that first book, I was just trying to finish writing a book because I had never written a book before, So, in that case, I was just trying to complete it and figure out what the process. In the next couple of books, I thought my job was to say exactly what John would say and do it the exact way he would do it. And I realized that was the wrong goal. Okay. And I didn't know anybody who did what I did, so there was nobody I could ask. And what I finally figured out was, okay, that's not the right goal. The goal is to give the reader the same experience reading the book as somebody got in the audience listening to John. And that's been my target ever since then.
And so what steps do you take? Again, to me, this is a leadership lesson in and of itself, right? Mm. It takes the ability for, say, for example, that, as a leader is working with one individual, how is that going to then be conveyed to the next step? In other words, if you're communicating this to me, how do I turn around and communicate it to others? And in being able to, really anticipate that, I think is a great leadership skill that comes about through experience and through being able to read people. And to me, you were able to watch John and say, okay, this is what he's doing, and I want someone that reads his book to feel the exact same way. How did you find the ability to distill that and really understand it? Was it trial and error? Was it, personal yourself? It's like, all right, this is how I feel with John, and I want to write how I feel. Explain that to me a little bit more.
Well, first of all, there was a lot of error. There was a lot of trial and error. In some of the early days, I would write a chapter, and John would say, "Well, let me go over this with you a little bit because you're getting kind of boring here." So those are the words every writer wants to hear. Oh, you're boring, yeah. But I had to try different things. I'll tell you, part of the benefit to me was that I was an English major. So I've got a bachelor's and master's degree in English literature, which means I have read a lot of really great writing. And what's ironic about that is I was not a reader as a kid. I'm the only person that I know.
That club.
Oh, are you?
Part of that club. Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'm the only person I know who majored in English who was not a reader as a kid. The other kids were reading 50 books over the summer in the summer reading program and stuff. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. But once I started reading, I really got captivated by really, really good writing. And to be honest, I have a difficult time reading anything that's not well written. It just makes my brain hurt. And because I'm a slow reader, I don't want to do it. I don't want to read it.
Yeah.
But I had read so many great things and had been affected emotionally and intellectually by all those things that I think I started to develop an intuition for what worked and what didn't. So honestly, it's a little bit difficult to describe how to do it. Going to the leadership side, I think one of the challenges is you want to be able to speak the message and the vision of your leader, but you want to be able to make it your own so that you don't sound like a parrot, and that you have the same kind of conviction and ownership when you deliver it to the people you're leading.
Yeah.
The thing I did with John's a little bit different is because I was trying to do his voice, not my voice. But if you look at the books before I started working with John, the voice is a little bit different. So I feel like over the course of time together, over these almost 28 years, we've developed his written voice. You know, by my trying to capture what he communicates and knowing his values and trying to please him, because at the end of the day, it's his book with his name on it. It's got to carry his message. I think over time, I developed a voice that became his written voice. And hopefully it imitates his spoken voice. And I've had people tell me, John's books, they didn't know I was the writer. You know, when they said this, they, I love John's books because they're exactly the way he sounds. And I kind of laugh inside because I think they totally don't sound the way he sounds in order to for me to try to make it sound the way he sounds. But I took that as the greatest compliment that, they didn't know I was behind the scenes working on it and that it worked.
So you mentioned it there, and I'd love to know this because to me, it's an evolution and growth of every single person and leader. And I think you're a guide that has helped through that process and be a part of the process. But you mentioned earlier that, John's voice before you guys started working together, where you're able to provide more of the finer tuning to that written part of John. Where was that maybe different beforehand?
So if you go back to John's very first book, which is called Think on These Things, it's a short book, like 100 pages. Each chapter is 3 pages, and it reads a lot like a sermon. And John wrote those out longhand, but every message in all of its depth was 3 pages. So one of the things that John did was he would just say something and move on. And one of the things I had to learn how to do was flesh out his idea. Because so many times on stage, John will say something and he'll say it in a clever way, and everybody intuitively knows what he means. But if you ask somebody to explain it, they'd probably say, you know what, I don't know, I just know it's true.
Yeah.
Well, you can't do that in a book.
Yeah.
You've got to flesh it out a little bit. So I started to flesh some things out that he maybe would deliver in a bullet line or a turn of phrase or in a one-liner or in an anecdote. And I had to learn how to flesh that out.
Okay.
So that's part of it. And if you look at his early books, I'm trying to think. This wasn't true for Think on These Things. Think on These Things and The Winning Attitude, which has been renamed. I can't remember what they're calling it now. Those are 2 early books of his that you can see they're very, very much his style. So he doesn't always develop his ideas with the same depth that he would if he was having a conversation with you.
Yes.
But some of his other books, they're very listy. John loves lists. He thinks in outlines. So you'll have bullet point A or number 1. And under that, he's got A, B, C. But under C, he might have another list that's going to be, 1 in parentheses down that. And then there might be a bullet list inside of that point too.
Yes.
So you've got lists within lists within lists. When you're a speaker and you have a written fill-in-the-blank outline for people in the audience, which John used to do, he doesn't do it that much now, telling them where you are on number 3 or point D helps them keep track of where they are. If you're reading that in a book, you get to a point where you're going, what list am I in again? And you go back and go, okay, this is point number 3. But wait a minute, it's under D. I don't remember what this, wait a minute, and this is part of another, and your head explodes.
Yes. Yes.
So even now, sometimes John will give me an outline that's too detailed, and I'll go in and I'll take some of the subpoints, and instead of having them as bullet points, I'll translate that into text. I'm still trying to help people figure out where they are, but not get them bogged down. Stay more with John's train of thought than more this as John would say, hut 2, 3, 4 kind of a thing.
Yeah, I can appreciate that and really appreciate you sharing that, because I think, one of the things even for myself and thinking in that context, so often we get buried down in the details that we miss the big picture. And what I just gathered from you there is, especially writing a book, there's plenty of opportunity to go into the detail, but it's telling it in a narrative that people want to consume more of it. It's not in greater detail to give it more depth. It is to give more depth to the actual picture.
Yeah. It's texture, it's understanding. When we worked on the 21 Laws, so the birth of that book occurred on a golf course. John's editor at that time, Victor Oliver, played golf, and on the course he said to John, John, I think you need to write a book on the laws of leadership. And Victor pulled out a book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And he said, it needs to be like this. Laws of leadership, lots of case studies. So John thought about that, and he chewed on it for a while. He thought, that might be a pretty good idea. So he brought together 3 of us with him, and he said, okay, I'm thinking about doing a book on the laws of leadership. I want you guys to come with anything that you think might be a law of leadership. So, each of us came with a list. I think, I probably had about 35 ideas. One of the other guys had even more than that, So, and these were 2 other guys who had been on staff with John at Skyline. They were good thinkers. John had trained them in leadership, and me. And so when we sat down, John's like, okay, it's got to be about leadership, specific to leadership. It's got to always be true, regardless of culture, time frame, gender, position. A law is a law is a law. So one of the guys starts talking about ideas, and he's like, John's like, yeah, that's not always true. And we talk about another idea. He goes, that's always true, but it's not specific to leadership. And then he talks about another, and he goes, that's pretty good. I think that might be a keeper. So, we did this with, our 60, 90 ideas. And we knew there was just one thing we knew. It could not be 22. It had to be something other than 22 because of the 22 immutable laws of marketing. So we go through, and John probably spent 5-6 months just thinking about what was a law, what wasn't, how is it phrased, and we narrowed it down to 21. When I started working on the book, our editor had said lots of case studies. And I thought, okay, to me that means stories. So I started thinking about stories, and as I worked on the book, I started researching stories and looking for stories and realized I wanted to open and close every chapter with a story. Because I thought, you read the story, you learn the principle, you read another story, and your brain goes, oh, I get it. I can contextualize it. I can see how it worked here. And maybe I can look at my own story or somebody else's story, and I can apply this law. So the stories really give that context and texture. And ironically, you might feel like there's less depth when you're telling a story, but if the story is really representative, it actually gives it more depth and gives it greater nuance, and people can really grab hold of it. Because a lot of times, if you're teaching principles or data, they can't remember that, but they can tell back the story.
I mean, that comes to our human nature is where, if we look back before even the printing press, everything was communicated in stories, and that's how people remembered it. I just have a question and thought. As you mentioned that, you said, hey, I'm going to take each one of these laws and I'm going to, bookend it, this chapter with a story. Was that something that had been previously in the books that you had written, or was that a new idea to that book?
No, that was a new idea. I'm trying to think about what books we did. So we originally did that book. It was published in 98. And we had done Developing Leaders Around You. We had done a book that nobody's ever heard of and is out of print called Breakthrough Parenting. Uh-huh. So that had some stories in it. So we had put a story here, a story there, but we hadn't really been that intentional. And to be honest, John does love to tell a story, but he'll tell a real life story of his own, or he'll tell a funny story. But he doesn't do these long narrative stories. That wasn't his style on stage. So I think he was a little bit skeptical of it in the beginning, because it didn't match what he does on stage. But people connected with it, and I think he very quickly realized, okay, this really helps the process when somebody's reading it. And he was all on board after that for us to do that in the other books. And now it's kind of become our signature style.
Yeah, which honestly, I think a lot of authors have now seen the value in that. I just got done reading Donald Miller's latest book, Hero on a Mission. And, very much of that is that style of a point, but stories surrounding that point that really describe all of that point with depth. And I think that's kind of probably, your work at that has really changed the style of a lot of, I would say, informational nonfiction, because it is almost fiction in itself because it's a lot of stories, but those stories are real life as opposed to being made up.
Yeah. It was really interesting working on that book because I think our editor suggested Ray Kroc and the McDonald brothers.
Okay.
But that was really the only story in that whole book where he said, I think you should include this story. So I went and read a book called Beyond the Arches to read about the history of McDonald's and to learn about Ray Kroc. And I drew on that and I thought, okay, how am I going to use that to teach the law of the lid? Leadership ability determines your levels of effectiveness. I'm like, okay, so I've got to pick and choose the narrative of that really makes that principle come alive. So, it was interesting going out and trying to find stories because it's a lot of work finding 42 stories.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about it, the question I want to ask is, all right, which law was the hardest to find a story? Or which one did you there's so many stories, I got to pare this down?
Well, it was really interesting because as I was on this, I would go on the search for a story for a particular law. And sometimes I'd read one and I go, okay, I could use that for 2 or 3 different laws. To be honest, to try to remember, gosh, okay, so now I'm trying to remember which of the stories was the hardest. This was 25 years ago.
Yeah, it was a few books ago.
Probably the law of intuition because it's not as tangible as some of the other ones.
That makes sense.
That can be tricky. We ended up doing a story on Steve Jobs for that, which worked. But in the original book, John had a story about how he's intuitive when it comes to speaking and how Margaret's intuitive when it comes to clothes and decorating. Did it work? Yeah. Is that a really satisfying leadership story? No. That's why it didn't make the cut in the 25th. It was like, okay, that's one that's got to go. We're going to get rid of that one. And I ended up doing research on Jamie Kern Lima, and her story replaced that, because she, part of it for her was the intuition of knowing that her makeup line was really something that could work for women like her and her, so there was that. her conviction that it was needed in the marketplace, her conviction that women needed a product that made them feel beautiful, whether or not they looked like a supermodel, her conviction that when she did do advertising, to not use these beautiful young models, but to use real looking women of different ages and sizes. And then even her intuition to wait to sell the company until she could sell it for $1 billion. So it had all of these iterations of intuition, which is like, okay, that is so much better than John saying, yeah, I just know what to speak because I have an intuition for speaking. And I can't dress myself, but Margaret can dress me, you know?
Well, I appreciate that. That's good. Knowing Jamie Kern Lima's story, and absolutely, it's kind of that I know that I know that I know that I know, and it is that intuition. And then when you continue to see that play out, it's that belief that comes from it. I appreciate it. Which one of the laws, as we go back, and now we're kind of talking a little bit more about the 21 laws, the 25th anniversary. Which one of the laws kind of over time said, wow, this was a bigger law than we realized?
Oh, gosh, that's a tough question. It's really funny with the laws. When we started out with them, one of the things that John said was, he said, these laws can stand alone. They don't have to build. So you take any law and you embrace it, and it can make you a better leader. So, that's kind of been the case. I think if John said that, he would probably say the law of the inner circle was the biggest.
Yeah.
Those closest to you determine your level of success, because it has continued to play out in his life, I think.
Yeah.
He says he kind of discovered that in his 40s, or late 30s, early 40s, when he was at Skyline. And he realized that, you've only got so many hours in the day. You can only do so many things yourself. And he realized he had to train other leaders at another level than he ever had before, and to train more of them and to expect more of them. So, some of these laws just kind of stand as just as a truth, that like leadership is influence. Mm-hmm. But something like the law of the inner circle feels very, very personal and really determines kind of what happens in your life. It's not as abstract. It's not as remote. Yeah. It's not just something that you can teach to somebody else. It's something that you have to live, or you're not going to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, no, I get it. It to me is, there's a lot of intention with the inner circle. It just doesn't happen. None of the laws happen, but yet you can find people that are more gifted in some of the laws than others. There's, as John talks about in the book, there's, you could be in that inner circle, and there's one person that is really strong in 5 or 6 of the laws, and maybe not as strong as the others. And that's how the benefit of that inner circle. But I believe it's with great intention. Do you surround yourself with people that, balance that out, that, bring all facets of the 21 laws, as opposed to, well, I'm going to find myself and I'm just going to be in a room with a lot of people that have a lot of intuition, and we're just going to go on intuition, and we're not going to focus on some of the other laws. Well, you're going to end up in a bad spot, right? And to me,
you need the law of navigation in that place.
Yeah, totally. I think one of as I was, again, preparing for this and thinking back over time, the law that probably I look at and say, wow, I didn't realize how important this was the law of empowerment. And I say that because of a lot of personal growth, but seeing the downfall of a lot of organizations and how many of them have fallen, and especially over the last 2 years, because of this lack of empowerment, meaning if I'm not controlling you, I feel unsafe and I don't have a place. Yeah. And to me, that was, pretty interesting. And so I'd love for you to kind of share, where are maybe in your discussions with, John and Mark, where are you guys saying, man, I see how this really added value to people because they got better because of this book?
It's funny. Every now and then, John is at a conference or at a leadership training, and he typically hangs around to sign books for people.
Yeah.
If you have a book with John's signature, it's worth no more than a book without his signature, because he has signed millions of books for people just out of kindness, to do that. But every now and then you'd find somebody who'd come with a book that's tattered and beaten to death and is all filled with notes. And they've said, yeah, this is my 5th time through reading it, and I've studied this backwards and forwards, and I'm waiting, and I've really made this the roadmap for my life and all that. And it's just, you just never know what's going to strike for people. I think, the most significant books in my life are things that I read that I needed at the time that I read it.
Yes.
And sometimes you recommend a book that you've read to somebody else and they go, but you hand it to somebody else and it's a life changer for them too. You just never know with these books. Yeah, it is like the law of timing. It really is. And the law of process, because we're trying to grow and change and develop too. So, gosh,
yeah.
One of the things that's a challenge for me, one of the things that's a challenge for me is I'm always behind the scenes. So very rarely am I hearing on the front lines what people are saying about the books and what they're doing for them. I remember, this is more than a decade ago, having an email forwarded to me. I think it was by Linda Eggers, John's assistant. And it was from a guy in the military who was like a squadron leader for pilots. And, I don't know how many years ago, there was a plane, and I think it was Marine jet, that was flying in Italy, and it flew too close to a gondola and snapped the gondola line, and some people that were in the gondola fell to their deaths. And there was this inquiry and all this stuff. And this was the commander of that squadron. He wasn't the pilot who had done the accident, but he was the one. And I think, he probably, I don't know if he ended up having to leave the military or what it was, but this letter wrote about how he read Failing Forward and how it helped him regain his confidence and realize his life wasn't over. And I just thought, wow, that's just extraordinary. And you don't know when you're working on a book if it's going to really make a positive impact with a lot of people, or if it's just going to be something that goes out there that people just don't connect with. It's really strange.
Yeah, and I understand that. And I think that's what's so hard compared to writing books, compared to speaking, is speaking, you can get a little bit more of that feedback. And in writing it, there's just a lot of faith and a lot of belief that it's going to hopefully impact someone, or you're going to learn and get better the next time and be more impactful. Yeah. One of the questions, one of the thoughts I had here, and as you've written a lot of books, you've written books with John, you've written books with your wife, you've done other projects, you've written a short, a film. How often do you need to just take ideas that are streaming through your head and just kind of set them aside and let them simmer and come back to them? Meaning, if you're at any given time, you might be working on 2 or 3 different projects. And, that's just because of things that you have happening. And, you'll go through a day and it's like, all right, I'm going to focus on this one. I have a lot of good ideas. And then I stall out. You know what? I'm just going to put that to the side. I'm going to let it sit. I'll go work on something else. Maybe I'll go for a run. Maybe I'll go outside. Maybe I'll go get inspiration other. How important is that into your writing process?
It's very important. One of the things that I'm constantly balancing is when to just put my nose to the grindstone and persevere, and when to shift gears. A lot of beginning writers automatically want to shift gears. And the reality is, if you give up too easily, you're in trouble. So I did a lot of writing in school. I had to write a master's thesis, which took me 4 years to do. I finished my classes fast, and it took me 4 years to do it because I didn't like writing. Okay. So being a writer at all is kind of, it's like God's got a sense of humor about these things. So when I was working at a college, they assigned me the duty of writing a self-study, which was, it's probably about 150 pages, which I look at that now and I think, that's nothing. Back then, it looked like an insurmountable task. And they sent me home to work on that self-study. And they said, look, once you work at home on Mondays and you can write, because we've got to get this thing done. So I remember the first Monday that I worked at home to write, and I sat at my desk. It's the same desk that I've got sitting back there now. I sat at that desk the whole day, 8 hours, because I felt like I was supposed to be working on the clock. At the end of the day, I had one sentence to show for it, and it wasn't even a good sentence. I mean, I typed a lot of stuff and scratched it out, typed stuff, scratched it. It was a terrible, terrible day. But I had to learn the perseverance of sitting in the chair. That's really what a lot of writing is. It's the grind. But the reality is sometimes when you're grinding away, you're not getting anywhere. Mm-hmm. So there are times there's a benefit to working on multiple things at the same time, because you can go, all right, I'm making no progress on this. Let me work on this. So at least you're getting progress somewhere. Sometimes you just have to grind it out and go, there's a deadline here. And even though I'm not making progress, I got to make progress. It probably took me 5 years to get to the place where if I have to produce, no matter what, in a compact amount of time, I can do it. But I am constantly trying to capture ideas, think of new things, jot down stuff. If I'm working on a project, sometimes if I'm working on chapter 2, I'll have an idea for chapter 10. I got to get that down in some kind of way so that I don't lose it when I get to chapter 10. I've started carrying a little bitty, as a matter of fact, I took it out of my pocket before I sat down here. It's over on my desk. A little bitty notebook that has a pen with it that I stick in my back pocket. I used to email myself writing ideas, or I would text them to myself, and a lot of times I would end up not capturing them. Now I capture them in this little book, and I've got an idea for a short story, there's a novel that I've been kind of playing around with the idea for in my head for about 10 years, and I got a kind of a little breakthrough insight for that, which I wrote down, and I went, oh, that could be good. All right. So, I'm constantly working these things in my head. I'm an introvert anyway. So, that's kind of where I'm at. And I'll work things on my whiteboard. I've got an 8-foot by 4-foot whiteboard over on that wall over there. So, capturing ideas is something you've always got to do. John is great at this. He used to have a little, for years he talked about how next to his bed, he had a little notebook with a pen in it. When you pulled the pen out, the light came on, so he could write it down in the middle of the night. And people, wanted to buy them and all this stuff. Now John carries an iPhone and an iPad, so he writes stuff down there. So he's really good. He's always been good about capturing and filing, quotes and that sort of thing. So, so I would say absolutely, you've got to find a system that works for you. You've got to try to get this stuff down. And you've got to find a way to keep moving forward, especially if you want to write anything.
I think from the extent, again, extrapolating this and connecting it to leadership is, it's a big part of having a vision and conveying a vision is understanding, am I capturing these ideas to be able to share with others? And, I heard a gentleman, John Houston, was a previous guest. He shared this. Rob Hoskins was talking to him. It's like, for every idea, it's either for you to keep, it's for you to partner with someone else, or it's for you to give away. And I think that process, even as you're talking about, I'm writing down these ideas. I know there's probably been a moment that John's either done it for you or you've been around the situation. Just like, here's this idea. I don't know if it's for me, or maybe it's so get incorporated somehow, some way into the entire world because it's relevant to what's going on. I know that's the case because I've seen it happen. And I think that's pretty important to, just have a process and a system. I, am very much a one of digital world, whereas, I'll write it down on, I have a notebook here. I write down ideas, but it's real hard to file them in regards to, where is that one? Whereas my iPhone, I can, write it in there and then all of a sudden I could search for it and like, I wrote it 5 years ago, whatever. Here's the topic. Oh, that's not relevant. Or, wow, I thought that 5 years ago. That's pretty awesome. That's what I've personally found.
Has John ever shared with you his system for how he captures quotes and stuff from books?
Maybe, but maybe not. I'd love for you to share.
All right. So when John reads a book, as he's reading, and he doesn't, I don't think he reads anything digitally on a screen. I think he's still, it's got to be a paper book for him. So as he goes through, and I do this myself, as he goes through, he'll mark something. He'll read a sentence or a paragraph, and he'll bracket it on the page. And in that moment, he'll decide, what's the subject matter of that? Is that attitude? Is that leadership? Is that, perseverance? And so he'll decide in that moment what that is, and he'll write that word in the margin. Then he'll go to the cover of the book, and he'll write page 12, perseverance. So the whole time he's reading, he's marking stuff. When he gets done with it, he hands it to his assistant. She types all those up, and they get filed by subject. He has done that since he was 18 years old. And anytime he's working on something, he goes, I need a quote on perseverance. He's got 10 of them because over the years, he has filed them.
Collected them. Yep.
So he is never looking to figure out where something is that he captured. He always, like I say, he's very disciplined. He always has it in a file. So he has done his for years on index cards. I've got on Dropbox, I've got a folder called quotes, and I've got all these different subjects. And as I find quotes, I dump them into those individual files. Now, I don't have as many as John has, but I tell you what, I've got hundreds and hundreds of quotes on writing because I'm constantly capturing stuff on that.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, it's as you mentioned earlier, never being a reader, I couldn't stand to read. It was too boring. It was more of like, if I was really interested in something, man, I read it. But, as I think now it's pretty normal for me to go to 2 or 3 books a week. Either that's listening on Audible, it's actually having the physical copy in my hands. And a lot of that is focusing on something I'm interested in. And it's how is that relevant? It's funny to me, you bring up 22 immutable laws of marketing earlier, because that's something that, a subject that I didn't necessarily think that much about. But, I've talked to Jeff Henderson, a previous guest, and, talk about this leadership and marketing. It's like, great leadership is great marketing, and great marketing is great leadership. And so I think it's funny you bring that up. And again, that spurred this interest. I want to know more there, how to connect the dots. And to me, as I think about this idea of reading and capturing those quotes and getting that information, is if I'm bringing that in, if I want to be able to go back to it, it's because I'm willing to learn with the desire to share with others, to be able to either act it out, live it out, give it to others, and be that conduit of, be that river per se. To me, that as I look back now, that's what's driven a lot of my desire to read.
Yeah. It's funny for me, when as a kid, I didn't read at all. I didn't start reading until I was a junior or senior in high school, and I started reading fantasy literature, fantasy and science fiction. That's what got me to begin as a reader. I went off to college thinking I was going to major in engineering, but trigonometry and I didn't get along very well, so that ended pretty quickly. I took a literature class and just kind of fell in love with it. And my parents expected, I've got 3 siblings and I'm the youngest. My parents expected us all to get a degree. And I thought, I think I can stand this for 4 years, because I didn't like school either. But, so all those years, I read assigned textbooks and other subjects, but all the books that I read were fiction. And that's all I did. When I started working for John, that's when I started reading nonfiction. So, or actually the year before, I was in a thing with Dan Ryland where he had us reading a leadership book a month. And after that, I decided, I think I probably should try to read a nonfiction book a month. And for 20, 25, 30 years, I did that. A few years ago, I started kind of getting the bug to do some more creative writing. And I thought, you know what? I think I might want to write, what do they call it? Middle grade books or young adult fiction or something like that. So I thought, I'm going to read some of that. I read like 35 books that year, which just shows you my pace of reading nonfiction versus fiction. So, I did it as a discipline, reading nonfiction. And like you, if I'm really interested in something, I'll read it. Other than that, it's really more of a matter of discipline than desire, honestly. I still would rather, if I'm going to just read for fun, I would still rather read fiction.
Yeah. Now, there's one author, and I like all of his series of books. He's on the usual path as a lot of authors, 1 book a year. His book comes out in July, close to my birthday. And so I'm like, I'm going to read that 1 book. It's going to take me probably 6 to 8 hours. I'm going to get through the whole thing in 1 day. I'm done with it. And that's the fiction book I read for the year. It's Brad Thor. I love his, the kind of that espionage type world. Okay. That's the only fiction I read. Other than that, it's, like I said, this idea of marketing and leadership and just a lot of that stuff that I'm enthralled by, being around people and seeing the impact. I want to kind of end up. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, it's really interesting. When John is always reading with 2 minds. One is, what do I need to capture to put into my speaking and writing? And what do I need to teach others? Very similarly to you. He very much goes into it with a mindset of what can I convey to somebody else, and he takes great joy if he can teach it to somebody else in 24 hours. I mean, he is fast. Yeah. My mindset has been informed by John, but it's a little bit different. I'm trying to build who I am, and most of the time I'm teaching out of that situationally rather than proactively, more reactively rather than proactively. Yeah. So I admire people like you who are doing it with intentionality in a proactive way to teach it. For me, it's like, I started a YouTube channel a year ago, and I'm teaching basic cooking because in my first career I was a chef. And there's a generation of younger people out there who don't know how to cook. And I thought, let me teach some basics. So I've been doing that. But for me, it's not, it's like, you know what? I should teach this technique. Oh, I should teach them how to do this. None of it is pre-programmed. I'm just working it out of the experience of my life from the last 40 years. And then teach, I don't even write it out to teach it because it's so ingrained in me. I'm just like, okay, let me just put it out there from who I am. So anyway,
next Food Network talent, Charlie Wetzel. Here we go.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're going to want me on Food Network. YouTube works for me.
Yeah, exactly. So, as we're getting to the end of our time here together, there's one thing that I want to know, and from your perspective, as you said, you're a different perspective. You're the guy writing the books. You're working with John. You're working with the whole team to collect all of this information and then be able to spin it into the world to where it's in this neat little package, in this little book, to where people can refer to it. Give me your perspective of the impact of the 33 million books that have been sold in the last 25 years or so. I'd love to hear that.
Gosh, that is hard to quantify. It's hard to get my brain around. You talk about copies of books, and that's kind of a fun thing to throw out there because it's a big number. But so many people have been changed by the things that John has done. Really, when John started writing about leadership, there really weren't a lot of people writing about leadership. There were management books out there, and for the most part, management really deals with systems, whereas leadership deals with people. And John was, I guess he was pretty revolutionary in that space. There's a lot of talk about leadership. When John first started, he used to say, I've got 3 degrees, and I've never been taught I never had a leadership class in any university that I went to, which was true for him. That, leadership classes are commonplace now.
Yeah.
Back, 30 years ago, they were not. John has definitely made an impact on that space. So I wouldn't, I don't know the world well enough to say that he, single-handedly championed the movement, but I feel confident that, he was definitely a big part of that movement. And when somebody becomes a better leader and has good values, then life gets better for everybody they touch. So, that's a huge thing. And then, so you look at the big picture, but going all the way back down to the simple. When I was a member of John's church before I worked for him, I read The Winning Attitude. And I was not a person who had a particularly good attitude. I had a little bit of a victim mindset. I felt like the world kind of did to me what it wanted, and I was not proactive. They talk about locus of control. And I had already been working on that a little bit, but when I read The Winning Attitude, it really cemented in my mind that my attitude about life, my attitude towards other people, was 100% my responsibility. That message changed my life. Well, has that happened for every single one of the 34 million people? Probably not. But it certainly happened for a lot of them.
Yeah.
And we don't, and if they're like me, they may have passed along a book to somebody else, so maybe 2 people were changed by that physical copy of the book. As a person of faith, I don't think I will really have any idea of what the impact of John's books are until I get to heaven. Because there are just too many people in too many places and too many things that may have happened or happened that none of us but the person it happened to will ever know about. I'm grateful that I get to work with somebody who cares about people and is trying to make a difference, and that I get to be a part of that with him and have for almost 30 years. It's been a great, great journey.
Oh, it's awesome. Love it. There's one last thing I'm going to share, and it just happens to be the copy of the 21 irrefutable laws that I have. I've listened on Audible. I've gone through the workbook, and I didn't look at this page until today. And this is what it says at the top. And I must have bought this used. To Howard Schultz, thank you for taking time from your family to be a part of our special occasion. I hope you will find this book as valuable as I have in building a legacy of leadership. As the Talmud says, learn from every man. With appreciation, David Hyman. I thought that was pretty interesting that I have that book. But
it is.
To 2 gentlemen there that obviously received this book, appreciated it. Thank you for making it such a powerful book 25 years ago and again now. Thank you so much for your time, Charlie. I treasure it immensely.
That's cool. Thank you so much, Tyler, for having me. It's been a great conversation, and I wish all your listeners and watchers out there that, to have a great time learning and leading.
I believe one of the great pieces that I picked up from Charlie during this episode is the process that he shared of John's note-taking. Yeah, John's told me that before, but it's really understanding how can you implement yourself and what does that mean for you as a leader? If you're collecting information, if you're reading books, but if you're not making notes to share and teach that with people, if you're not making notes like John does, he makes those notes to be able to present it in a speaking engagement, or he's going to write it in a book. As Charlie mentioned, to me, we all have the opportunity to be a teacher. John's a teacher. Charlie's a teacher. They just teach in a different format. You're a leader. You're a teacher. We're all teachers. So we collecting the information that we consume daily, even if it's online, or how are we filing that away so that way we can share it with someone else? As Charlie said, one of the great attributes John has, and I've seen him do this, if he learned something yesterday, he's going to be telling people about it today. He doesn't need to be a master at it. He doesn't need to master the subject. And I've learned that in my experiences. And I think that's a great testament to leadership in action. You don't have to master it. You just have to realize, oh, that's really good. I need to change that in my life. I need to apply that to what I'm doing. I need to teach others. See, to me, that's what separates leaders. I'm not a leadership expert. I'm just a student, and I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to grow. And I hope that you're gathering a little bit and learning with me as I get to share these words with you, because it's about being willing to go through the process. It's becoming and developing that mastery in leadership that you really grow and implement a lot of the laws as part of the 21 laws of irrefutable leadership. I hope you join in with us this month. Read 21 laws with us. Love for you to be a part of the impact-driven leader community. And thank you for being here today. Again, if this is the first time ever listening, I'd love for you to subscribe. If you got value out of today's episode, my conversation with Charlie, I'd love for you to share it with others. And as always, I'd love for a rating review. Let me know how we're doing. Check out everything that is Impact Driven Leader at my website, tylerdickerhoff.com. Check out all the show notes. And thankful for you being here. Until next time, have a good one.